Beneath Northview Academy's pristine facade, Jasmine Rivers hides a shattered past and an unyielding secret that will ignite a revolution. Dive into her shocking journey of betrayal and fierce defiance, and discover how silence transformed into unstoppable power. Jasmine Rivers stepped off the bus into the brisk Chicago morning, her eyes scanning the horizon with a quiet intensity that belied the turbulent past she carried with her. The city, wrapped in the early haze of autumn, exuded both promise and mystery. Tall buildings loomed like silent sentinels over the bustling streets, and the crisp air was filled with an undercurrent of stories waiting to be told. For Jasmine, each step on the worn pavement of Northview Academy's entrance was a deliberate stride into a future she was determined to reclaim. A future where her identity would be defined by her strength, not by the scars of a past riddled with cruelty. Northview Academy stood before her as an imposing fortress of polished stone and shimmering glass. Its ivy-clad walls and meticulously maintained gardens suggested an almost otherworldly perfection. Yet beneath this gleaming exterior, Jasmine sensed something intangible, a current of expectation, a hidden code of conduct that demanded conformity and silence. The institution, renowned for its academic rigor and celebrated alumni, harbored unspoken rules that dictated who belonged and who would forever remain an outsider. To the casual observer, Northview was a beacon of excellence, but to those who truly looked, it was a stage upon which subtle prejudices played out in whispered conversations and sidelong glances. As Jasmine walked through the grand archway into the school's expansive lobby, she felt as though she had crossed a threshold into a different realm. The marble floors reflected the soft glow of natural light streaming through stained glass windows, and the quiet hum of conversation blended with the faint echoes of footsteps. Every detail, from the polished brass fixtures to the inspirational quotes etched into the walls, was designed to evoke a sense of order and unity. Yet for Jasmine, each carefully placed element only underscored the chasm between the ideal of unity and the reality of isolation she felt in her bones. Her journey to Northview had been marked by hardship and resilience. Born and raised in a neighborhood where survival demanded unyielding grit, and every day was a battle against systemic neglect, Jasmine had learned early that silence was not always golden. It could also be a prison. In the concrete labyrinth of her old home, her identity had been forged in the crucible of struggle and defiance. Now, stepping into a world of pristine corridors and regimented routines, she carried with her not only memories of past battles but also an unspoken vow. Never again would she allow someone else to dictate her worth. In her first class, a sunlit literature room filled with the murmurs of earnest discussions and the rustle of turning pages, Jasmine found herself drawn to a large poster emblazoned with the school's motto, Excellence Through Community. The words, though meant to inspire, struck her as hollow and rehearsed, a mantra recited without true understanding. They whispered of a unity that excluded rather than embraced, of a community where excellence was measured not by individuality or courage, but by the conformity to an ideal that had been designed long before she was born. Jasmine's eyes lingered on the faded letters, her heart tightening with a mix of defiance and sorrow. In that fleeting moment, she recognized that her presence here was a quiet challenge to an order that had long marginalized voices like hers. Throughout the day, the subtle art of exclusion unfolded around her. In crowded hallways and bustling classrooms, she was met with polite nods and guarded smiles that barely concealed layers of assumption. Every hushed whisper and fleeting glance served as a reminder that she was an anomaly, a lone figure in a sea of carefully curated uniformity. Yet even as these unspoken judgments weighed heavily on her, Jasmine's spirit remained unbroken. Her gaze, dark and determined, carried the weight of unvoiced histories, the promise of battles fought and won in quiet defiance. During a solitary lunch break, Jasmine found refuge in a quiet corner of the sprawling cafeteria. The room was alive with the clamor of laughter and animated conversation, yet here in the shadow of a tall column, the world seemed to slow to a contemplative pace. Seated at a worn wooden table, she allowed herself a brief moment of vulnerability, a silent acknowledgement of the loneliness that often accompanied her. As she unwrapped her modest meal, memories of a past filled with both harsh realities and fleeting triumphs played across her mind. Every morsel of food became a symbol of survival, a reminder that even in the midst of isolation, there was nourishment to be found for both body and soul. Outside, the city of Chicago pulsed with its own symphony of contradictions. Vibrant energy mingled with quiet resilience, modern ambition softened by the weight of historical injustice. The distant rumble of traffic, the murmur of street vendors, and the rhythmic clatter of train tracks created a backdrop that was both chaotic and harmoniously intricate. To Jasmine, the city was more than a collection of streets and skylines. It was a living, breathing testament to the indomitable spirit of its people. In the midst of the urban sprawl, she saw reflections of her own journey, moments of despair interwoven with flashes of hope, struggles that forged character and resilience. As the school day wound down and the late afternoon sun bathed the corridors in a golden hue, Jasmine found herself drawn to a secluded alcove near a window overlooking a quiet courtyard. Here, the noise of the day receded into a gentle murmur, and the stillness allowed her thoughts to take shape. She recalled the lessons learned on the tough streets of her youth, the importance of standing firm, of refusing to be defined by the expectations of others. In that solitary moment, she vowed silently that Northview Academy would not be a place where her spirit would be diminished. Instead, it would be the stage upon which she would reclaim her narrative, transforming every instance of exclusion into a declaration of self-worth. In the echo of distant voices and the soft rustle of leaves outside, an unspoken promise was born. Jasmine recognized that her path would not be easy. The corridors of Northview Academy were lined not only with the polished facades of success, but also with the ghosts of those who had been silenced by indifference. Yet within that daunting reality, she discovered an unwavering certainty, a belief that true strength lay not in quiet resignation, but in the courage to disrupt the status quo. With every hesitant step, every measured breath, she embraced the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The potential for pain was real, but so too in the depths of her mind, a storm was gathering, one that promised to reshape not only her destiny, but also the very fabric of the institution that sought to define her by its narrow standards. The silence that had once been her shield now became a canvas upon which she would paint a future of defiance, dignity, and hope. Jasmine's eyes, fixed on a horizon that blurred the lines between past and future, shimmered with a mix of trepidation and anticipation. She could sense that the events of the coming days would be the turning point, a moment when the suppressed truths of Northview Academy would burst forth in a torrent of revelation. As she made her way to the final class of the day, a quiet study hall filled with the soft rustle of pages, and there, in the solitude of that study hall, Jasmine allowed herself a fleeting moment of introspection. She opened her battered notebook, its pages filled with the careful documentation of every hardship and every triumph. Each entry was a testament to her determination, a record of the battles fought in silence and the promises made to herself in the quiet hours of the night. In those handwritten lines lay the blueprint of a revolution, one that would begin with her own awakening and ripple out to transform an institution built on pretense and exclusion. The day's final bell rang softly, drawing an end to the structured chaos of school life. As students spilled out into the cool evening, the familiar rhythms of Northview Academy took on an almost haunting quality, a reminder that beneath the veneer of order, the seeds of dissent and transformation were already taking root. Jasmine lingered at the threshold, looking back at the grand entrance with a mixture of defiance and resolve. In that lingering gaze, she silently vowed that she would not allow herself to be reduced to a mere statistic of conformity. Instead, she would rise, fierce, unyielding, and unapologetically herself. With the setting sun casting long shadows over the campus, Jasmine stepped into the twilight, her footsteps echoing like a heartbeat of rebellion. The cool air caressed her face, and in the fading light, every tear, every scar, and every whispered word of defiance shimmered with the promise of a new beginning. It was a beginning steeped in mystery and charged with emotion, a prelude to a story that would challenge the very foundations of silence and oppression. In that moment, as darkness settled over the city, Jasmine's life at Northview Academy, once marked by tentative hope and quiet resilience, took a dramatic and heart-wrenching turn as the subtle cruelty that had defined her early days began to mutate into overt, malicious hostility. The delicate balance she had maintained in this prestigious institution was shattered one fateful afternoon, setting in motion a cascade of events that would forever alter her sense of self and challenge the very fabric of the school's seemingly immaculate order. It began with the quiet murmurs of discontent that circulated in hushed tones along the corridors. Jasmine, with her steady determination and guarded eyes, had long sensed that beneath the polished surfaces of Northview lay an undercurrent of exclusion, a collective belief that her very presence was an anomaly. Those who walked the halls with unspoken entitlement, particularly a group of seniors led by the charismatic yet cruel Darius Cole, viewed her as an easy target, an outsider whose differences were meant to be mocked. Alongside Darius, his cohorts Marcus and Terence executed their roles with unsettling precision. They were not reckless in their cruelty. Instead, their actions were calculated, an unspoken protocol of degrading those who did not conform to the unwritten rules of the elite environment. One cold afternoon, when the sky hung low and the city's usual clamor softened under the weight of an approaching storm, Jasmine found herself sitting at a long, worn table in the crowded cafeteria. The room vibrated with the clatter of trays and the animated chatter of students discussing trivialities. Yet, in the midst of this chaotic normalcy, an insidious plan was set into motion. Jasmine, absorbed in the quiet ritual of her solitary lunch, had barely noticed the furtive glances exchanged across the room. But in the eyes of Darius and his group, a sinister satisfaction was evident, a thrill derived not from overt malice, but from the anticipation of reducing her dignity to nothing more than a spectacle. In that charged moment, Terence, whose laughter often masked a calculated intent, moved with a deliberate stealth towards her table. His hand, almost casually, reached for a pair of school-issued scissors that had been left unguarded near the supply closet. To an unobservant onlooker, the act might have seemed trivial or accidental, but for those who harbored the dark plan, it was the culmination of months of silent aggression, a final stroke to erase Jasmine's individuality. In a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, Terence snipped at the flowing strands of Jasmine's hair, a mane that had been both a source of personal pride and a silent testament to her heritage. The scissors, cold and unyielding, severed not only hair, but a part of her identity that had been painstakingly nurtured against a backdrop of adversity. Time seemed to fracture as the strands fell to the linoleum floor, each lock a symbol of violation. The cafeteria, once filled with the mundane noise of everyday school life, was suddenly pierced by a collective gasp, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and an almost palpable surge of revulsion. For a fleeting moment, silence reigned. Jasmine sat, frozen in a state of utter disbelief, as if her mind refused to reconcile the reality unfolding before her eyes. The laughter that erupted in its wake was not one of joy, but a cacophony of cruelty, a cruel symphony orchestrated by those who had believed that their actions would subdue her spirit. Darius's voice, smooth and derisive, cut through the stunned silence. "I guess someone couldn't handle a little trim," he sneered, his tone laced with contempt. Marcus and Terrence's chuckles followed, their mirth echoing off the cafeteria walls in a way that magnified the humiliation. The cruel humor was not meant to entertain. It was a calculated jab, a declaration that Jasmine's uniqueness was an aberration to be mocked. In that moment, every strand of her hair, each lock that had once been a crown of beauty and strength, became an emblem of her vulnerability, a stark reminder of how quickly the forces of derision could strip away one's dignity. As the onlookers' reactions rippled through the room, Jasmine felt an overwhelming surge of isolation and betrayal. Her heart pounded fiercely, each beat a reminder of the life she had fought so hard to reclaim when she first stepped into Northview. The act of having her hair cut was not simply an assault on her physical appearance, it was an assault on her very identity, a deliberate attempt to reduce her to an object of ridicule. It was as if the bullies had taken the very essence of what made her who she was and treated it as if it were nothing more than an accessory to be discarded at their whim. In the aftermath of the incident, the world around Jasmine seemed to blur into a montage of stares, whispers, and muted expressions. The cafeteria, once a place of casual interaction, transformed into a theater of judgment where every eye was fixed on her, each gaze a silent verdict. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with an almost tangible expectation that she would succumb to the humiliation, that she would allow their cruelty to define her. Yet, even as tears threatened to spill, Jasmine's inner strength, honed through years of survival, held her in a state of resolute stillness. Her mind, though reeling from the shock, began to piece together a counter-narrative, a narrative that would eventually become the foundation of her transformation. Away from the public eye, in the quiet solitude of her bedroom that night, Jasmine cradled the severed strands in her trembling hands. The sight of her hair, once a source of pride and an unspoken declaration of her identity, now lay scattered like remnants of a battle fought without consent. In that moment of intimate despair, the weight of her loss was almost unbearable. Every fallen lock echoed with the voices of those who had diminished her, every frayed strand a testimony to the cruelty inflicted upon her without remorse. But as darkness enveloped her room and the city's distant hum provided a lullaby of urban isolation, something deep within her began to stir, a spark of defiance that would not be easily extinguished. The very next day, Jasmine moved through the corridors of Northview with a measured calm, her eyes betraying none of the turmoil within. Yet beneath that veneer of quiet strength, a storm was gathering, a storm fueled by the raw, unfiltered pain of betrayal and the unyielding desire to reclaim what was taken from her. The incident, seared into her memory, became a turning point. It was no longer merely an act of bullying. It was a defining moment that split her path into two distinct futures, one of silent suffering and one of resolute rebellion. In the days that followed, the repercussions of the hair incident rippled outward, infecting every corner of the school. Classrooms that once buzzed with the predictable rhythm of academic life now seemed to pulse with a darker energy. Jasmine, once seen as a quiet newcomer, became an unwilling focal point of both scorn and unexpected sympathy. While many students exchanged furtive glances that carried the weight of unspoken judgments, a few kind souls reached out with subtle gestures, a quietly placed note in a locker, a soft word of encouragement whispered in the corridor. Yet for every act of compassion, there were countless others that served as painful reminders of her isolation. The bullies, undeterred by the immediate consequences of their actions, continued their campaign of degradation with renewed fervor. Their tactics evolved from a single, violent act to a relentless barrage of humiliation. They began to orchestrate scenarios designed to erode her sense of self further, overturning personal belongings, mimicking her distinctive gestures, and even staging public displays of mockery that left little room for escape. Darius, Marcus, and Terence, confident in their established hierarchy, operated with a sense of entitlement that left no doubt about who held the power. Their behavior was a deliberate extension of a system that valued conformity and punished deviation. And in their eyes, Jasmine represented the very antithesis of what Northview stood for. Amid this escalating cruelty, Jasmine found herself grappling with an internal conflict that was as profound as it was painful. The more the bully sought to diminish her, the more a deep-seated resolve began to take root within her. In the quiet sanctuary of the school library, where the rustling of pages offered a fleeting escape from the harsh realities of her existence, she began to document every incident. The battered notebook that became her constant companion was filled with meticulous entries, each one a chronicle of the torment she endured and the subtle shifts in the behavior of those around her. This record, initially a means of processing her pain, soon evolved into a powerful archive of truth, a testament to a reality that could no longer be dismissed by those in power. Even as the physical reminders of the assault on her identity haunted her, Jasmine's inner voice grew stronger with each passing day. The memory of the scissors, the cruel laughter, and the stinging betrayal became a catalyst for introspection. She began to understand that the attack was not just on her hair, but on her heritage, on the cultural tapestry that had defined her since birth. In many ways, her hair was more than a feature. It was a symbol of pride, a manifestation of a history rich with tradition and resilience. To have it cut so callously was to have a part of her story rewritten by someone else, an act that was as dehumanizing as it was senseless. The emotional toll was immense, and for nights on end, Jasmine lay awake, questioning the fairness of a world that allowed such cruelty to exist. Yet, within the depths of her despair, a quiet resolve began to crystallize. She realized that if she were to reclaim her narrative, she would have to transform the pain into a force for change. The notebook in her hands was no longer just a repository of suffering. It was becoming a manifesto, a record of every moment that, when pieced together, would reveal the systemic failures that allowed such injustices to persist. Outside, the city of Chicago moved on in its relentless rhythm, indifferent to the quiet battles waged within the walls of Northview Academy. But for those who dared to look closer, the stark reality of Jasmine's experience was a mirror reflecting a deeper truth, a truth that spoke of societal neglect, of institutions that prized outward perfection over the inner lives of those they served. As the days bled into weeks, whispers of her ordeal began to seep into the conversations of those who felt equally marginalized. In hushed tones in the corridors, in tearful confessions shared in the dim light of after-school study sessions, the story of Jasmine's violation grew into a symbol of a struggle against the forces that sought to silence individuality and enforce a uniformity that was as oppressive as it was invisible. Jasmine, though wounded and raw, refused to be defined solely by the cruelty inflicted upon her. In the quiet aftermath of each cruel encounter, as she recorded the details of every slight in her notebook, she also began to document her own emotional evolution. With each entry, she reclaimed a fragment of her shattered self, piecing together a mosaic of resilience that glowed with the promise of redemption. The pain of that single, unforgivable act was indelibly etched into her soul, yet it also became the spark that ignited a burgeoning sense of purpose, a purpose that would soon compel her to rise against the tide of indifference. In the solitude of her private reflections, Jasmine found herself revisiting the stories of those who had come before her, figures whose lives had been marked by struggle, whose voices had been silenced only to rise in defiance. Their legacies, inscribed in the annals of history, whispered of battles fought in quiet corners and revolutions born from the ashes of despair. In their stories, she found both solace and a call to arms. The realization that her suffering was not isolated, that it was part of a continuum of marginalized voices, lent her the strength to envision a future where such cruelty would be met with unwavering resistance. As the relentless bullying persisted, the corridors of Northview Academy became a microcosm of a society divided by silent prejudices. The bullies, secure in their belief that their actions would go unchallenged, were increasingly unaware that each cruel act was tightening the noose of a system on the verge of transformation. Their laughter, once a weapon meant to debase, was gradually being overshadowed by the growing murmur of discontent among those who had witnessed the injustice. Even in the midst of the cruelty, Jasmine's quiet defiance sparked a subtle but profound shift, a glimmer of hope that would eventually coalesce into a broader movement for change. By the time dusk settled over the campus, and the harsh fluorescent lights of the school hallways gave way to the gentle glow of twilight, the impact of the day's events was unmistakable. Jasmine, standing at the threshold of yet another day marked by the scars of betrayal, felt a profound mix of sorrow and determination. The cruelty inflicted upon her was a wound that would take time to heal, yet it also served as a rallying cry, a silent, unyielding declaration that her story was far from over. It was a promise that the unpardonable act of that cold, calculated moment would not define her. Instead, it would become the bedrock upon which she would rebuild her identity and forge a future where her voice could no longer be silenced. In that relentless darkness, where each shadow in the corridor echoed with the ghosts of cruelty, Jasmine began to see the outlines of a new resolve. The searing pain of humiliation had unveiled a truth that to overcome the systemic injustice around her, she would have to confront it head on. Every documented slight in her battered notebook, every whispered rumor in the hallways, was a call to awaken not only her own spirit, but also the dormant voices of those who had been long suppressed. As she walked home that evening through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, the cold drops mingled with her tears, each one a silent promise of a revolution that was just beginning. Jasmine's footsteps, steady and resolute, echoed in the night, a reminder that even in the face of unspeakable cruelty, the human spirit could rise, unbowed and indomitable. And though the scars of that day would forever be a part of her, they also illuminated the path toward a future where the silence of oppression would be shattered by the roar of truth. In that transformative moment, as the city around her hummed with the ceaseless pulse of life, Jasmine Rivers vowed that she would not allow the unpardonable act to become the final word in her story. Instead, it would be the catalyst, a spark that ignited within her a profound determination to stand against the tide of cruelty, to transform personal pain into collective strength, and to rewrite the narrative of Northview Academy, one truth at a time. The legacy of that dreadful afternoon was far from contained within the confines of the cafeteria. It seeped into every corner of the institution, challenging the very foundations upon which the illusion of perfection had been built. And as the night deepened, Jasmine's inner resolve grew, intertwining with the quiet whispers of change that were beginning to stir in the hearts of those who, like her, had long suffered in silence. Her journey through that dark valley was only the beginning, a painful, necessary prelude to a transformation that would reshape not only her life, but also the destiny of an institution built on ideals that were, in truth, hollow. Jasmine's inner world, once shrouded in the quiet acceptance of pain, began to stir with a fierce determination that neither time nor cruelty could suppress. In the silent aftermath of that unspeakable day in the cafeteria, something fundamental shifted within her, a transformation that would mark the beginning of her awakening. No longer content to let the cruelty of others dictate her worth, she started to gather the scattered pieces of her identity and forge them into a weapon of resistance and hope. It began with small, almost imperceptible acts of defiance. At first, Jasmine's transformation was internal, a gradual realization that the wounds inflicted upon her were not marks of defeat, but rather the raw material from which strength is born. In the quiet sanctuary of the school library, she began to reread passages from authors who had written of overcoming adversity. Their words, resonant and vivid, ignited within her a spark of courage. She started to see that her pain, as excruciating as it was, could be a catalyst for profound change. With each page, with every carefully annotated note in the margins, she felt the stirrings of a rebellion not aimed at destruction, but at the reclamation of her dignity. In those long solitary hours, Jasmine's battered notebook transformed from a ledger of torment into a chronicle of possibility. Every detail, each whisper of cruelty, every sidelong glance that sought to diminish her, was inscribed with a purpose. She began to document not only the harsh realities of her daily existence, but also the flickers of beauty and resilience that emerged in the most unexpected moments. The notebook, once a silent repository of sorrow, became a manifesto for change, a blueprint of defiance that would later serve as both shield and sword in her struggle for self-respect. As the days passed, Jasmine's transformation manifested itself in her demeanor and actions. In classes, where she had once remained an inconspicuous observer, her voice grew steadily bolder. It was as though every lecture and every discussion became a stage for her to assert her right to be heard. When a teacher mistakenly addressed her with a patronizing tone or a classmate's comment hinted at underlying prejudice, Jasmine met it not with tears or retreat, but with a calm, unwavering gaze that spoke of inner fortitude. Each small confrontation was a quiet declaration. She would no longer be a passive recipient of injustice. The change did not go unnoticed. See, Lillian Hart, whose gentle encouragement had always provided a sanctuary in the chaotic world of Northview Academy, began to see a renewed light in Jasmine's eyes. In the soft glow of the art room, as sunlight filtered through high windows, Ms. Hart remarked, "You've discovered something within you that few dare to embrace, the power of your own truth." Those words, tender yet transformative, bolstered Jasmine's resolve, urging her to step further into the role she was destined to play. One afternoon, during a period of free study, Jasmine found herself surrounded by a few fellow students who, like her, had felt the sting of marginalization. There was Brianna, whose quiet intelligence often went unnoticed amid the clamor of conformity. Malek, whose introspective nature hid a profound reservoir of dreams. And Elena, a young artist whose creativity had been stifled by the demands of a rigid curriculum. In that moment, as they shared whispered confidences and silent understandings, an unspoken bond was forged among them, a bond built on mutual recognition of their shared struggles and aspirations. What began as a small gathering in a secluded corner of the library soon evolved into a collective determination to challenge the status quo. They talked of creating safe spaces where voices like theirs could be nurtured rather than silenced, and of transforming the very culture of Northview Academy from within. Jasmine's inner revolution found its first public expression during a school project assigned in a history class. The task was to explore narratives of social change, and Jasmine chose to focus on the untold stories of those who had dared to rise against oppression. With meticulous research and an impassioned narrative that drew upon her own experiences, she crafted an essay that was as much a personal catharsis as it was a historical inquiry. When she read her work aloud, the room fell silent. Every listener could feel the raw emotion in her voice, the steady cadence that carried the weight of a truth long buried. Her words spoke not only of past injustices, but of the enduring spirit of resistance that could transform even the deepest wounds into sources of empowerment. Her courageous act of self-expression ignited something profound in her peers. Conversations, once limited to quiet exchanges and furtive looks, began to blossom into open discussions about identity, respect, and the need for change. Jasmine's essay, later circulated in whispers through the corridors of Northview, became a rallying cry for those who had long suffered in silence. It was a call to arms, not a call to violent upheaval, but a call for collective resilience and a reaffirmation of one's inherent worth. The transformation that had begun in the depths of her solitude was now rippling outward, touching lives and altering perceptions. Yet the journey was far from simple. As Jasmine's defiance grew, so did the resistance from those who had once thrived on the suppression of individuality. Darius Cole, along with Marcus and Terrence, found themselves increasingly unnerved by the steady rise of her spirit. The bullies, who had once operated with impunity, now faced a challenge they had not anticipated, a challenge born from the very pain they had inflicted. Their sneers and jeers, once so effortless, now carried the weight of insecurity as they struggled to reconcile their sense of power with the undeniable force of Jasmine's awakening. In the midst of these internal battles, Jasmine's own emotional landscape became a tapestry of conflicting sentiments. There were moments of profound sorrow, when memories of the humiliation returned with a vengeance, when the pain of betrayal seemed too overwhelming to bear. Yet intertwined with these moments of despair was a growing reservoir of hope. In the quiet solitude of late evenings, as she pored over her notes and reflected on the day's events, Jasmine began to see that each hurtful act, each moment of injustice, was not a chain that would bind her, but rather a stepping stone towards a future where she would be defined by her resilience. It was during one such evening that the full weight of her awakening crystallized into a resolve that would shape the course of her future. Sitting at her small desk, the glow of a solitary lamp casting long shadows across the pages of her notebook, Jasmine allowed herself to confront the depth of her own pain. With trembling hands, she wrote not just about the cruelty she had endured, but about the possibilities that lay beyond it. Each word was a declaration, a promise that she would reclaim every part of her identity that had been marred by prejudice, that she would stand tall even when the forces of oppression seemed insurmountable. The notebook became a testament to her transformation, a sacred text in which the language of hurt was transmuted into a vocabulary of hope and resistance. In that moment, as the clock ticked steadily into the early hours of the night, Jasmine realized that her journey was no longer just about survival, it was about revolution from within. The awakening was not a sudden, explosive burst of defiance, but a gradual, deliberate emergence of a spirit that had been tempered by adversity and refined by introspection. It was the birth of a resilience so profound that it promised to challenge the very structures of a system designed to silence voices like hers. Her burgeoning defiance soon found expression in everyday acts of courage. In class discussions, she began to challenge assumptions with thoughtful questions that forced her peers and teachers alike to reconsider long-held biases. In the quiet moments between lessons, she engaged in conversations that delved deep into the issues of identity and belonging, sparking a dialogue that had long been stifled by an atmosphere of conformity. Each interaction, no matter how small, was a brick laid in the foundation of a movement that sought to reclaim not just personal dignity, but a collective right to be seen and heard. Jasmine's transformation did not occur in isolation. The ripple effect of her resistance began to reach those around her, drawing in others who had long felt marginalized. The small circle of friends she had forged in the library grew into a broader network of allies, students who recognized in her the courage they had long yearned for, and who saw in her struggle a reflection of their own silent battles. Together, they began to envision a future where Northview Academy could be more than just an institution of academic excellence, but a community where every individual was valued for their unique perspective and innate worth. In these moments of collective empowerment, Jasmine's inner light shone with an intensity that dispelled the shadows of past pain. Her journey of awakening had transformed her into a beacon of resistance, a living embodiment of the idea that even the deepest wounds could give rise to a strength that was unbreakable. The transformation was not immediate, nor was it without its setbacks, but with every challenge, Jasmine found herself growing more resolute. The once quiet girl who had entered Northview Academy had emerged as a woman of conviction, a force of nature capable of inspiring change not only within herself but throughout the entire community. As she stood before a classroom one day, delivering a presentation on historical figures who had turned adversity into triumph, Jasmine's voice rang out with clarity and passion. Her words, laced with the wisdom of someone who had experienced both the depths of despair and the heights of hope, resonated with her audience. It was as if every story of struggle and every triumph of the human spirit converged in that single moment, creating an atmosphere charged with the promise of transformation. In that room, the boundaries that had once separated the oppressor from the oppressed began to blur, replaced by the shared understanding that true strength lies in the courage to embrace one's vulnerabilities and turn them into sources of empowerment. That day marked a turning point, not only for Jasmine, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized in a system that prized conformity over authenticity. The power of her awakening lay not in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet, relentless persistence of a spirit that refused to be defined by its scars. In the intimate space of her thoughts, Jasmine had learned that resistance was not about waging war against those who inflicted pain, but about nurturing a belief so profound that it transformed every setback into a stepping stone towards a better tomorrow. In the months that followed, as the season shifted and the corridors of Northview Academy echoed with the sounds of change, Jasmine's journey of awakening and resistance continued to unfold with a grace that was as subtle as it was powerful. Each day, she moved with the quiet assurance of someone who had faced the darkest of nights and emerged into the light. Every conversation, every carefully chosen word became part of a tapestry of resilience, a tapestry that would ultimately inspire not only her peers, but an entire community to rise above the chains of oppression and reclaim their rightful dignity. In the silent spaces between the lessons and the laughter, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. It was a journey of transformation, a journey that had begun with a single, painful act of cruelty and blossomed into a resounding declaration of self-worth. As she walked through the halls, her eyes alight with the fire of unyielding determination, Jasmine Rivers embodied the truth that every scar, every moment of anguish, was a testament to the indomitable spirit of resistance. And in that truth lay the promise of a future where silence was no longer a shackle, but a prelude to a symphony of voices united in the fight for justice, dignity, and hope. The atmosphere at Northview Academy began to shift imperceptibly at first. Then, with an undeniable force that shook the very foundations of the institution, Jasmine Rivers, whose journey of inner awakening had ignited quiet revolutions within her, now found that the tide was turning beyond her personal sphere. A carefully compiled dossier of incidents, painfully recorded in the pages of her battered notebook, had made its way into the hands of those who cared deeply about justice. What began as isolated whispers of discontent among students and sympathetic teachers was now coalescing into a chorus demanding accountability. The once silent corridors of Northview were now abuzz with voices that refused to be ignored. In the wake of the escalating incidents, a detailed report emerged, meticulously assembled from Jasmine's records and corroborated by accounts of other marginalized students. This document, heavy with the weight of undeniable evidence, soon circulated among the school's faculty and reached the local community leaders who had long championed educational equity. In community centers across Chicago, where the city's pulse was felt in every fervent conversation, meetings were convened with a sense of urgency. Parents, educators, and activists gathered in modest halls and even on busy street corners to discuss the systemic issues laid bare by Jasmine's testimony. There, under the hum of earnest debate and the glow of hope amid disillusionment, the call for reform became more than a rumble, it became a demand. The reaction within Northview itself was swift and transformative. Principal Jonathan Reeves, long the stoic guardian of the school's polished reputation, found himself confronted by the stark reality that the institution he had helped build was steeped in silent injustice. In the dim light of late afternoon meetings with the school board, he was forced to face the painful truth that the culture of exclusion and indifference had taken root far deeper than anyone had admitted. The board, typically a body of composed, measured voices, now hummed with tension as heated discussions unfolded over policy failures and neglected responsibilities. Reeves, whose every word had been measured for decades, now spoke with an urgency that betrayed his deep concern. He acknowledged that maintaining the facade of excellence meant nothing if it failed to protect the dignity of its most vulnerable students. The community response was not confined solely to the administrative corridors of Northview. Local media outlets, known for their commitment to in-depth investigative reporting, began to shine a light on the story. A well-respected newspaper in Chicago published a series of articles that brought Jasmine's narrative and the accompanying evidence into the public eye. The coverage was unflinching and raw, presenting a balanced account that interwove the personal struggles of a determined young woman with the broader failings of an institution that prided itself on order and inclusivity. The impact of these articles was immediate. Parents began to question long-held assumptions, educators reconsidered their silent complicity, and the broader community, once unaware of the subtleties of these daily injustices, demanded swift action. In response to the mounting pressure, Principal Reeves initiated a series of meetings that would mark the beginning of a fundamental transformation at Northview Academy. An ad hoc task force was formed, drawing in a diverse group of voices, experienced teachers, empathetic administrators, concerned parents, and even a few brave student representatives who had witnessed the hardships firsthand. Their mandate was clear: to delve into the systemic problems that had allowed the repeated incidents of bullying and discrimination to go unchallenged, and to propose tangible reforms that would restore trust and dignity within the school. Jasmine's meticulously kept records became the cornerstone of these deliberations, a silent testament to the experiences of too many students who had been forced to endure humiliation. The task force's work was both painstaking and revelatory. Through long hours of interviews, review of disciplinary logs, and the painstaking collection of testimonies, a portrait of institutional neglect emerged. It was a portrait that revealed a pattern of dismissals, of complaints being brushed aside as mere gossip or insignificant pranks. For many, it was clear that the issues were not isolated to a single act of cruelty, but were symptoms of a deep-seated culture that prioritized image over individual well-being. As the task force compiled its findings, the narrative shifted from one of isolated incidents to a systemic indictment, a call for a radical overhaul of policies that had long rendered certain students invisible. Within the broader community, the discussions that had begun in small groups grew into larger, organized forums. Town hall meetings, held in community centers and local libraries, became platforms where educators, parents, and students gathered to share their stories and demand accountability. These meetings were raw and unpolished. Voices trembled with emotion, and the air was thick with both anger and hope. In these spaces, the narrative of Northview Academy was rewritten in real time. No longer was the focus solely on academic achievement or external appearances. The conversation now revolved around the fundamental rights of every student to be treated with dignity and respect. At one such forum, an impassioned parent recounted the moment when she first learned of her daughter's struggles. With tears in her eyes, she spoke of the silent suffering that had taken place in the school's corridors, of a culture that had allowed cruelty to flourish under the guise of maintaining order. Her words resonated deeply with everyone present, a poignant reminder that the cost of inaction was measured in the emotional toll borne by families and communities alike. In that room, surrounded by the shared pain of too many, the determination to see change took on a palpable intensity. The collective resolve to challenge the status quo was no longer a distant dream, but an urgent necessity. As pressure mounted, Northview Academy began to implement concrete changes. Mandatory workshops on racial sensitivity, anti-bullying training, and restorative justice were introduced for both staff and students. Reeves, speaking at a somber assembly, acknowledged that these measures were merely the beginning, a necessary first step in addressing decades of neglect. Yet for many, these actions represented a crucial turning point, a commitment to transparency and a promise that no student would ever again be made to feel invisible. The policies, once relegated to the back pages of bureaucratic reports, were now imbued with the urgency of a community that refused to be silenced. Amid this sea of institutional reform, Jasmine emerged as a reluctant yet undeniable symbol of resistance. Invited to share her story at a specially convened town hall meeting, she stood before an audience that included not only members of the Northview community, but also local activists, educators, and concerned citizens. The room was heavy with anticipation as Jasmine spoke, not with bitterness, but with a measured clarity that carried the weight of both personal loss and hard-won wisdom. I stand here today not as a victim, but as a voice for every student who has ever been told to shrink, to silence, to conform, she declared. Her words, resonating with both vulnerability and strength, were a clarion call for a future where accountability was more than just a buzzword. In that moment, the power of her testimony transcended the individual. It became a beacon for change, a rallying cry that underscored the necessity of a system that was as just as it was exemplary. The ripple effects of that public declaration were profound. In the weeks that followed, as new policies were implemented and training sessions became a routine part of school life, a subtle yet persistent transformation took hold at Northview Academy. The corridors that had once echoed with the silent judgments of conformity now buzzed with the tentative sounds of open dialogue and mutual respect. Teachers, who had once been complicit in a culture of quiet neglect, began to speak with renewed passion about the importance of nurturing every student's unique voice. Students, inspired by Jasmine's courage, started to challenge long-held assumptions and to embrace their own identities with pride. The institutional response, once marred by bureaucratic inertia, had been jolted into a state of active, if cautious, reform. Yet despite these positive changes, the road ahead was fraught with challenges. Deep-seated habits and long-entrenched attitudes do not vanish overnight. There remain pockets of resistance, individuals and groups within the school who clung to the old ways, whose voices of dissent were as loud as the cheers of those demanding change. The transformation was an ongoing process, marked by setbacks and hard-won victories alike. But in the midst of this turbulent journey, one truth became increasingly clear. The collective power of a community united by shared pain and common purpose was unstoppable. For the broader Chicago community, the saga of Northview Academy became emblematic of a larger struggle, a microcosm of the challenges faced by educational institutions across the country. Local leaders, emboldened by the undeniable evidence of systemic injustice, began to advocate for reforms that extended well beyond the walls of a single school. The conversations that had once been confined to the quiet corners of community centers now spilled over into city council meetings and public forums, where the call for accountability was met with both skepticism and hope. In these broader discussions, Jasmine's story served as a potent reminder that change was not merely an abstract ideal, but a tangible possibility rooted in the courage of individuals who dared to stand up and speak out. As the sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows across a city in transition, Northview Academy found itself at a crossroads. The era of silent complicity was drawing to a close, replaced by a fervent push toward transparency, equity, and genuine inclusion. In the wake of the collective outcry and the relentless pursuit of justice, a new chapter was being written, one that promised not only to honor the struggles of those who had been marginalized, but also to lay the groundwork for a future where every student was afforded the dignity they deserved. In this crucible of change, the legacy of the past, as painful as it was, became the catalyst for a revolution of the spirit. Jasmine Rivers, whose journey had sparked the flame of transformation, stood as a testament to the power of resilience and the promise of a tomorrow defined not by silence, but by the roar of voices united in the fight for truth. The tipping point had been reached, and as the community and institutional leaders forged ahead with their plans for reform, the once immutable structures of North. In the gentle warmth of early spring, Northview Academy had become a living testament to change, a place where transformation was not only possible, but inevitable. Jasmine Rivers, once a quiet observer of cruelty, now stood as a beacon of empowerment and renewal. The scars of her past had been transformed into symbols of her journey, a journey that transcended personal pain and reached into the very heart of a community desperate for justice. Her story had sparked reforms that rippled through every corridor, every classroom, and every heart within the institution. Now, as the season unfolded, Jasmine found herself at the forefront of a legacy that promised to redefine what it meant to be seen, heard, and valued. The corridors of Northview, once shrouded in the heavy silence of unspoken suffering, now thrummed with a vibrant energy. Classrooms that had once echoed with the whispers of exclusion now resonated with discussions on cultural identity, social justice, and the power of collective resilience. The reforms enacted by the task force were more than just policy changes. They were a reaffirmation that every student had an inherent right to dignity. Mandatory workshops on racial sensitivity, restorative practices, and open forums on equity had become integral to the school's daily life. Teachers, who had previously clung to outdated norms, began to embrace new pedagogies that celebrated diversity and encouraged critical thinking. In every corner of Northview, the echoes of Jasmine's quiet defiance had grown into a chorus of voices that demanded respect and fostered genuine inclusion. For Jasmine, the personal cost of her transformation had been immense, yet it had also imbued her with a strength that transcended the boundaries of pain. No longer defined solely by the cruelty inflicted upon her, she had reimagined her identity as a tapestry woven from threads of hardship, hope, and indomitable spirit. The very act of reclaiming her narrative had set in motion a cycle of healing, one that rippled outward, inspiring those who had long been forced into silence. Her once battered notebook, filled with the chronicles of injustice, had become a sacred artifact, a testament to every whispered wound and every silent victory. This record was not merely a personal memoir, it was a document of truth, a living legacy that underscored the need for accountability and compassion in every institutional space. In the aftermath of the sweeping reforms, Jasmine emerged as a leader whose influence extended well beyond the walls of Northview Academy. She became a mentor to younger students, guiding them through the intricacies of self-worth in a world that often sought to diminish their light. Together with a close-knit group of allies, Brianna, Malik, and Elena, whose own voices had found strength in her courage, she established a student collective that championed the rights of the marginalized. This group, soon known as the Rivers of Change Club, dedicated itself to organizing community events, art exhibitions, and dialogue sessions that celebrated the diverse narratives of its members. Their efforts were not aimed at confrontation alone, but at building bridges between disparate communities and fostering an environment where every individual could thrive without fear of prejudice. Outside the confines of the school, the impact of Jasmine's journey became a catalyst for broader social transformation. Local leaders, stirred by the undeniable evidence of systemic injustice at Northview, began to advocate for policies that extended far beyond a single institution. Educational conferences, community forums, and public hearings provided platforms where her story was recounted with reverence and urgency. Journalists and activists alike found in her narrative a microcosm of the struggles faced by marginalized communities nationwide. In city council meetings and neighborhood gatherings, discussions about equitable treatment and accountability in education took on a new fervor, influenced by the legacy that Jasmine had helped to build. Her voice, once subdued by the weight of unspoken oppression, now carried the promise of a future where every individual's dignity was protected. As the academic year drew to a close, Northview Academy celebrated its new identity with a renewed sense of purpose. A special assembly was held not merely to mark the end of a term, but to honor the spirit of transformation that had redefined the institution. Banners adorned with empowering messages and murals created by the Rivers of Change Club graced the walls of the auditorium. In that space, Principal Jonathan Reeves, now a man transformed by the lessons of accountability and empathy, stood alongside Jasmine. His measured tone, laced with sincere gratitude, acknowledged the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. Today, he declared, we not only celebrate academic achievement, but also the courage to redefine our community. It is a testament to the power of resilience and the unwavering belief that every student deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. His words resonated deeply with the crowd, encapsulating the transformative spirit that had taken hold within the school. For Jasmine, the celebration was a poignant reminder that her struggles had not been in vain. The journey had been fraught with moments of despair and heartache, yet every step had led her to this singular moment of triumph, a moment where her pain was transformed into a legacy of hope. Walking through the familiar hallways, she now felt the warmth of recognition in every smile, the respectful nod in every glance. The institution that had once been a stage for cruelty had been reimagined as a crucible for growth, a place where the shadows of the past gave way to the light of a collective future. In the quiet aftermath of the assembly, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the profound changes that had taken place. The legacy she was now part of was not defined by punitive measures or fleeting reforms, but by the enduring spirit of empowerment that had been nurtured in the hearts of those who had dared to challenge the status quo. Her own transformation, a journey from silent suffering to resolute leadership, had become a beacon for countless others. It was a legacy built on the courage to speak up, to document every injustice, and to transform each scar into a stepping stone toward a more just and compassionate world. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine continued to extend her influence beyond the school. She organized workshops where students could share their experiences and explore creative expressions of their identity. She initiated art projects that celebrated cultural heritage, inviting students to create pieces that told the stories of their communities. Through public speaking engagements at local community centers and schools, she inspired audiences with the message that true empowerment comes not from the absence of pain, but from the resilience to rise above it. Her speeches, delivered with quiet conviction and a sincerity that could not be feigned, resonated with a diverse audience, each word a testament to the transformative power of self-determination. The transformation at Northview Academy, while profound, was only a beginning, a foundation upon which an enduring legacy of empowerment would be built. The changes that had taken root within its walls were a promise of a future where every student could flourish without the weight of prejudice. Jasmine Rivers, whose journey had ignited a movement, now stood as a living embodiment of that promise. Her legacy was not a fleeting moment of rebellion, but a continuous, evolving narrative of transformation, a narrative that would inspire generations to come. As the final days of the school year approached, the once distant dream of true equity and inclusion had become a tangible reality. The institution that had once been a bastion of exclusion now radiated the warmth of community, the strength of shared purpose, and the beauty of a collective commitment to change. In every thoughtful policy revision, in every empathetic gesture, and in every empowered voice that rose in unison, the legacy of Jasmine's transformation was unmistakably present. In the stillness of one particular evening, as the sun dipped below the Chicago skyline and bathed the city in a soft, golden glow, Jasmine took a solitary walk through the now transformed campus. Each step was a meditation on the past, a silent acknowledgement of the struggles overcome, and a hopeful stride toward a future defined by compassion and courage. The school, with its vibrant murals and resonant laughter, had become a living testament to what was possible when individuals dared to reclaim their dignity. It was a place where the legacy of resistance had blossomed into a future of empowerment, a future where every scar was honored as a symbol of strength, and every voice was a note in a symphony of transformation. In that reflective moment, Jasmine understood that her journey was far from complete. The legacy she was helping to build would require constant nurturing, an unending commitment to justice and truth. But as she gazed at the faces of her peers, faces that now shone with the promise of a new dawn, she felt an overwhelming certainty that change was not only possible, it was inevitable. Her story, once marked by pain and silence, had evolved into a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And in that evolution lay the seed of a new legacy, a legacy that would forever redefine what it meant to be empowered, to be seen, and to be truly free. Jasmine Rivers' journey is one that defies the confines of a single narrative, weaving together threads of struggle, resilience, and ultimately, profound transformation. From the moment she first stepped off the bus into the brisk streets of Chicago and entered the hallowed halls of Northview Academy, Jasmine carried with her not only the weight of her difficult past but also a fierce determination to redefine her future. Her story is a testament to the idea that true strength is not measured by the absence of hardship, but by the ability to rise above it, reclaim one's identity, and forge a path toward a more inclusive and just world. At Northview, Jasmine initially encountered an environment that was as dazzling as it was deceptive, a place where pristine corridors and immaculate classrooms masked a culture of silent exclusion. The early days were filled with subtle barbs and furtive glances that aimed to diminish her spirit, an environment where her very presence challenged an unspoken status quo. It was here that the seeds of resistance were planted, nurtured by the stark realization that the conformity expected of her was a burden that stifled her true self. The cruelty she faced was not random. It was a calculated assault on her identity, a deliberate attempt to strip away the very essence of what made her unique. The defining moment, marked by the act of having her cherished hair cut by callous hands, served as a catalyst for Jasmine's awakening. That single act of violence was more than a physical attack. It was an assault on her cultural heritage and self-worth. In that moment of shock and humiliation, the raw pain she experienced could have easily led her to retreat into silence. Instead, it ignited a fire within her, a determination to transform her suffering into a force for change. In the quiet aftermath, within the solitude of her own reflections and the pages of a battered notebook, Jasmine began to document every injustice, every whispered slight, turning her pain into a powerful manifesto for resistance. As time progressed, Jasmine's inner transformation blossomed into outward acts of defiance. Her voice, once subdued by the weight of imposed silence, grew steadily bolder. In classrooms, libraries, and even in the brief interactions that punctuated the daily routines of Northview Academy, she began to assert her right to be seen and heard. Her once private reflections evolved into public declarations, inspiring not only herself but also a growing circle of peers who had similarly felt marginalized. With the formation of a close-knit group of friends, individuals who had long suffered in silence, Jasmine found solidarity and collective strength. Together, they envisioned a future where every student could express their individuality without fear, where dignity was not a privilege reserved for a select few, but a right inherent to all. The impact of Jasmine's transformation soon rippled beyond the immediate confines of the school. What had begun as a personal struggle against bullying evolved into a broader movement for institutional reform. Her detailed records and heartfelt testimonies became a cornerstone for change, sparking community-wide conversations about systemic injustice in education. Local media picked up her story, shining a light on the deep-seated issues that had long been hidden behind Northview Academy's polished veneer. Community leaders, educators, and parents rallied together, demanding accountability and real change. Through town hall meetings and public forums, Jasmine's narrative was not only validated but also amplified, reaching audiences far beyond the school's walls. The response from the institution itself was significant. Faced with undeniable evidence of a flawed system, Northview Academy embarked on a journey of introspection and reform. Mandatory workshops on racial sensitivity, restorative justice practices, and inclusive pedagogy were introduced, signifying a commitment to reshape the school's culture from within. Principal Jonathan Reeves and the school board, once steadfast in their defense of tradition, began to acknowledge the need for change, understanding that true excellence is measured not merely by outward appearances, but by the well-being and respect accorded to every student. In this atmosphere of transformation, Jasmine's leadership and unwavering resilience became a beacon of hope. Her story, a powerful reminder that even the deepest wounds can become the foundation for a legacy of empowerment. The legacy that Jasmine Rivers now embodies is not simply one of personal triumph over adversity. It is a testament to the transformative power of the human spirit. Her journey has taught us that every moment of pain holds within it the potential for growth, that every act of cruelty can be repurposed into a stepping stone toward change. The scars she bears are not marks of defeat, but badges of honor, symbols of a battle fought with courage and integrity. Jasmine's evolution, from a quiet girl burdened by societal expectations to a leader who champions the rights of the marginalized, illustrates a universal truth that transformation is possible when we dare to reclaim our narratives and refuse to be silenced by injustice. For all of us, the lessons drawn from Jasmine's story are deeply resonant. In our everyday lives, we are often confronted with challenges, whether they be subtle biases, overt discrimination, or the simple, yet profound, struggles of asserting our individuality in a world that sometimes values conformity over authenticity. Jasmine's journey teaches us that the path to empowerment begins with acknowledging our pain, understanding its roots, and transforming it into a source of strength. It is a call to action, to document our experiences, to speak our truths, and to build communities where every voice is celebrated. The legacy of resilience and transformation that she has forged reminds us that change, however slow and painstaking, is always within reach when we unite in the pursuit of justice. As we reflect on the profound narrative of Jasmine Rivers, let us consider the ways in which her experience can inspire us to foster a more compassionate, inclusive society. Each of us has the power to make a difference by standing up against injustice, by supporting those who are marginalized, and by nurturing an environment where dignity is the foundation of every interaction. Jasmine's story is not confined to the pages of history. It is a living, breathing call for us to embrace our vulnerabilities, to find strength in our scars, and to work collectively towards a future where every individual is empowered to be their authentic self. If you have been moved by Jasmine's journey, if her transformation and unwavering resilience have sparked a flame of hope in your heart, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on how you can be a catalyst for change in your own life and community. Every small act of kindness, every moment of standing up for what is right, contributes to the larger tapestry of a more just and equitable world. Let her story be a reminder that your voice matters, that your story has the power to inspire others, and that together we can create a legacy that transcends the boundaries of pain and prejudice. Thank you for listening to this powerful narrative of transformation and empowerment. If you found this story as inspiring and moving as we do, please subscribe to our channel. Your support not only helps us continue to share these important stories, but it also fuels the hope and determination needed to spark change in the world. By subscribing, you join a community committed to fostering resilience, championing justice, and empowering every voice to be heard. Together, we can ensure that the legacy of courage and transformation lives on, inspiring countless others to rise above their challenges and create a brighter future for us all.